Can't find.
Are we on the June 21st?
Yeah, I was just looking for the same thing.
Maybe that's June 21st
Mm-hmm.
then. No, but it's not there.
What's today? Yeah. Oh yeah, I think it may just been a glitch. Because it says oh. All right. Okay, but now my granite gets just blinked out. Okay, there we go. All right, we'll call to order the Housing and Human Welfare Standing Committee meeting. The time is 6:38. We've got a couple of things on the agenda, but there's a motion to amend the agenda, I believe.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll start with the roll call first. Alderwoman Tierney,
Here.
Alderman Chandlermeyer,
Present.
Alderman Gay is present. We have quorum. Before we get to the approval of agenda, is there a motion to amend the agenda?
I would like to motion to amend the agenda and remove R-20-22, the Affordable Housing Development Spa Road Site Resolution. We passed it as a council on Monday.
Oh, okay, you're ahead of me. Yeah.
Can I
Okay.
get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Awesome. Next up, approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Oh, when it did the approval, okay.
It's okay.
Approval of the minutes as well?
Motion to approve the minutes.
I second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? We'll move on to appointments and reappointments, which will carry as a block, but I'll give the courtesy of reading out the appointments so that the individuals understand,
Is anyone here?
maybe.
Oh, here, yeah, that's right.
So let's start. Can I have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to approve the appointments and reappointments. Motion to approve the appointments and reappointments as a block.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? And just to give courtesy, as I mentioned, because they volunteer and work hard on these commissions, so the recognition, the appointment of Joshua Hatch to the Human Relations Commission, the reappointment of Diana Grant to the Human Relations Commission, the reappointment of Edith Knight to the Human Relations Commission, the reappointment of Jerry Williams to the Human Relations Commission, the reappointment of Kenneth Starks to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Janet Norman to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Laura Graham Booth to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Lydia Odessa Ellis to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Jessica Packler to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Kayla Simon Golder to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Ednis Collison Lee to the Education Commission, the reappointment of Nancy Lipson to the Affordable Housing Community Equity Development Commission, the reappointment of Teresa Vaughn Bond to the Affordable Housing and Community Equity Development Committee. We thank you for your service in all of those committees, and the volunteer capacity is greatly appreciated.
That's some good auctioneering voice.
I just was thinking the same thing.
In my past career, I might have been a better, I don't
think so,
know.
in a previous life.
We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is in our last item on agenda, ID 13122, workforce housing discussion. As discussed, it was introduced on first reader on the floor this past Monday, now available to the public as ordinance 40-22, workforce housing for the purpose. I don't know why it still says that. We got to fix that. For the purpose of allowing workforce housing as a permitted use subject to standards in certain residential, commercial, office, and mixed-use districts, establishing the standards for workforce housing and generally related to zoning. I understand that there is presentation from the staff. Obviously, we send great thanks to the Planning and Zoning Department and their staff, as well as the Housing and Community Equity Development Commission and their staff, and the Affordable Housing Task Force for the recommendations. This probably has been in the works a little over 8 months. Correct me if I'm wrong once you have the opportunity to get on the mic, but we are really excited. And so I'll turn it over to the staff and commission to give a brief background. And what we'll do is, after you give a introduction, I'll work us down this block by block by block so that we can answer questions as we go. We'll discuss amendments at the end, and that'll, kind of get us out of here at an appropriate time. Awesome.
So I think where we were going to begin is to have Terry give some background.
We need Mike. She needs to get on the mic.
With the wrong name.
Your microphone.
It's all right, I wanted to have the members that are here today come up.
Absolutely.
And I'll try
Okay.
to talk about background.
We can give them, we can put it,
No, you wanted, you okay? Yeah.
And this will also be for the Planning Commission and the Rules and City Government Committee. Rules and City Government meets the first Friday of the month, so this Friday? Rules and City Government meets?
This Friday?
Okay, awesome. So they'll have a chance, and then, no?
This was referred to the planning commission. So it's not going to any committee besides yours because you requested it. The process would be for planning commission. Once they're finished, then it'll go back to you guys for public hearing, meaning the city council, and then to committees.
Okay, well, very long process then.
And we have, Alderman Gay, we have advertised, well, I'm going to send the ad tomorrow. We're going to advertise, we're advertising it for Planning Commission for July 21st for public hearing. That's the soonest it can go.
When is the next Planning Commission meeting?
Well, there's a meeting next week, but it can't go because there's an advertising requirement. So it will go on July 21st.
Okay.
And then that hearing, they have two meetings on legislation. So they would finish it up the first Thursday in August, and then it would come back with the findings to the city
It
council.
works out then.
That's the best schedule we've got.
It'll be September.
Yeah, so September-ish. September, spring, fall. Okay. Please, Teresa and crew. Hi, Elijah. How's everything?
See you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us tonight. Our chair is not available, so we're kind of the backups. My vice chair is here, and I wanted everybody to introduce themselves. I'm Terry Bond. That's the easiest way to say my name. It's long, but short. That's what I go by. And I'm a member of the committee. I have a background in planning and zoning, and that's why they wanted me to go through the zoning bill tonight. So let me have the other members introduce themselves.
And I'm Nancy Libson, and my background is in housing and affordable housing development.
Her mic is off.
Nancy Libson, and my background is in affordable housing development for some 40+ years.
And I'm Elisha Herrig Blaine, also on the commission, and I was the co-chair of the Housing Task Force. I've worked on housing and homelessness for a little over 20 years.
So you can see we have a strong background, and the two people that aren't here have great background too. So I'm probably the weakest member of the committee because my background is just in zoning, just a planner, but it's exciting. That's right, and it's exciting to be part of this because through our background and research, we realize it is through zoning and defining what affordable housing is and coming up with criteria to incentivize it and encourage it to happen are the only ways that you're really going to be able to especially get at the missing middle, which is the big group that we think are missing the most. So we started about a year ago. We were tasked with looking what Anne Arundel had done, using that as a sort of a guide, but we didn't have to exactly follow that. We quickly realized that Anne Arundel is very different than Annapolis. Some of you were involved back then. Annapolis, it doesn't have large lots of land available for development. We have a few, so our opportunities are going to be limited for new development, and mostly redevelopment is probably going to offer more opportunities in the long run. So that's why we came up working with staff, Jackie and Eric and Teresa, the best way to approach this in terms of defining workforce housing and permitting it and providing some incentives through this bill. Now, if you want me to go through the bill, I can. Would you like me to?
Well, let's allow the staff to introduce themselves.
Sure.
And then we'll walk through the bill as a group, if that's fine.
That's great.
Awesome.
Do you want to start? Sure.
Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning in the Department of Planning and Zoning.
Sorry, Jackie Rouse, and I'm a planning administrator in the Department of Planning and Zoning.
Good evening, I'm Teresa Wellman, I'm Chief of Community Development.
And I'm Michael Laplace, Planning Director, and I did not work on this, so I can't take any credit for it, but I'm very proud of it.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it. And the first question that I'm going to have, and I encourage my colleagues to ask questions as we move forward. If you all have anything, just we can keep this as an open discussion, but obviously being respectful of one another. Eric, you sent a note just before. I'm trying to find it as well. Because the very first thing is to households earning 60 to 100% of the area median income as permitted to subject to standards in certain residential, commercials, etc. I had questions regarding that, and particularly the income eligibility. Could you speak to that, or who would ever be more comfortable speaking to that, and just giving further explanation of how that can be broken down?
Well, I could just clarify what the legislation is saying in regard, but I think Teresa may know more about how we prove out income levels for qualified recipients of the housing. But I think the income levels that we included in the legislation, 60% to 100% of the area median income, that's a common metric that's used to assess housing need. What we're finding is when you look at the data, it's challenging to live in Annapolis, even if you make the median income for the area. It's around $100,000 for a household. So, 60% of that is, around $60,000. But we, in writing the legislation, there was kind of a recognition that some housing developers will be using low-income tax credits and will be building for a specific income level that might be under 60% of the area median income, or slightly over that. But then there's other housing developers that are going to be building for a higher, somewhere up to 100% of the area median income, and are not using low-income tax credits. And we wanted to incentivize that whole range there, so that we're sort of building for this kind of diversity of low to middle income households. I guess that's the best way to put it. Yeah, you want to?
Right, so I've just, Eric had sent you an email at some point today, Alderman Gay, with the AMI map, and I just forwarded that to Ellie and to Brooks, so that you can see, that this is something that I guess you all had a conversation about this morning, so I thought you would like to see the map that he sent you.
So can I ask a quick question? And again, please jump in at any point if you all have the question as well. Because when I look at the area, and this is just in regards to housing affordability, when looking at the area median income, which you said for a typical household is about $100,000. And so that breaks down on different levels. It says here 50%, 52%, so 60% will be around 60 and some change. The average income in, for example, affordable or HACA is $20,000. So how do we make up for the $30,000 gap in income eligibility so that those families too would be eligible for what we're proposing is missing middle housing? Or would that be on us as policymakers to create incentives?
Can I answer?
So I think that creating workforce housing like this is it's like we have a toolbox of options for filling in, for creating missing middle housing. And I don't think there's any one solution you can put forth that's going to be like the fix-all. So this fills part of the gap. And the concept with this, which is modeled on the county, is that we're trying to make this an attractive option for developers by making it a permitted use subject to standards. And you can see, I guess, at the top of page 2, all of the zoning districts will just be allowed subject to standards, which is comparable to what the county calls a conditional use. We also in keeping that, one of the standards is that a big increase in the density that would be allowed in this type of housing, because I think one of the biggest challenges in Annapolis with having any kind of affordable housing is that it's so expensive to build, and land is so expensive. So we have to create options that make developers want to, to make it feasible. There are developers out there who want to build workforce housing, who specialize in it, but you have to create a vehicle for them to get to that point. And so that's what we're trying to do with this.
Can we, Teresa, go ahead.
I'd just like to add that typically, the low-income housing tax credit funds housing affordable to 60% and below.
So that's,
So their maximum is 60% and then below. The Section 8 program is 80% and below. Public housing is 80% and below. Okay, MPDU program is 100% and below. So we might want to take a look at maybe tweaking this a little bit to add the below.
Where'd you say that was?
For the purpose of allowing the very first statement.
So you're saying under the, okay.
So it would be housing for people at 100% and below.
That would make sense.
Can you, because I need to make sure we track the necessary amendments, yeah.
he is good at that.
So what we're doing there is amending the purpose clause, correct?
Yeah.
So that would be page
Page 1.
line 21 through 24.
Well, we're just taking out the 60, just 100%, are we taking out the 62?
Yeah, lines 24 and 25.
So it will read, for the purpose of allowing workforce housing that is affordable to households
Jackie, you have to
earning
get on a mic.
100% or less,
And below.
Turn your mic on.
100% and below of the area median income, correct?
So we'll be scratching out, and just again, because I have to be able to
On line
just.
25, Alderman Gay.
25, okay.
We can give you a marked up copy of this at the end of the meeting, that,
Yeah, but we need to-
as you work through these
We
things.
need to make our.
And then as Jackie is mentioning, also on page 3,
Okay.
paragraph
Can I ask a question?
3,
Hold on, because Brooke, yeah, he's.
Yeah.
line 79.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's not jump to page 3 yet.
Okay.
Sure.
I'll just put a
Yeah,
circle.
so let's get a note down for the first one. We're striking households earning 62, and then it'll just say, for the purpose of allowing workforce housing that is affordable to households earning 100% or below?
And, yeah.
100% and below, okay.
So we're adding the words and below after 100%, got it.
Okay, 100% and below. And so that'll be the First Amendment. So, give me 1 second while I grab, oh, never mind.
Alderwoman Tierney's question is more relevant to this specific thing that we're marking up, so I'm going to yield.
I'll give the floor to Alderwoman Tierney.
I had a question on, I don't know how else to ask this. What is what is like the sweet spot, if you will, for the tax credits to kick in? Teresa looks like she knows what I'm trying to ask.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but the tax credits has a maximum of income of 60%. So everybody that lives there.
Okay, that's what I wanted to.
Yeah, everybody that lives there can't go over 60%.
That's the.
When they apply.
The important thing about tax credits is that if you're going to serve people well below 60% of area median, there's usually a deep subsidy involved.
Right.
This housing, there's not going to be any kind of deep subsidy involved.
Got it.
Yeah, I think if I can just piggyback onto what they're saying, part of the importance of that 60 to 100% range is that what we've found, you have housing that can be subsidized through the low-income tax credits to reach that under 60% of the area median income population. And then you have the high-income populations being served by, high-end housing where there's a sort of higher profit for the housing developer. But that middle range,
Yeah.
there's not the profit.
Yeah.
It's the housing costs, the land costs are high. The returns aren't as high as,
Yeah.
so that's really
Yeah.
what has been challenging. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the reason, part of the reason for including that range here.
In addition to that, people that, when you build a low-income housing tax credit project, some of the units are going to, most of the units are going to be low-income tax credit units. That means the rents are set by the low-income housing tax credit program, and they're typically lower. When you're building a Section 8 project, you are, there's a reimbursement, so people only pay 30% of their income. On the tax credits, they're not. There's no subsidy to that household. If the rent is $630, then that's the rent.
But, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow this as well for the income eligibility part, which I think is really important. So if if a developer, let's just use Spa Road as an example because nobody's really messing with that, and I feel that we can use that as an example without, insinuating any business or anything like that is taking place. If a developer is looking at that site, right, and they want to build there and they have the tax credits, and when you say tax credit, you're talking about either the 4 or the 9%?
I'm talking about the low-income housing tax credit program.
So would that either be the 4 or the 9%?
Yeah.
Okay. So they would come prepared with that, obviously, put together a financing package. Depending on the amount of units, that'll help establish the rents.
Help me with this, Nancy. So basically what happens is when they apply to the DHCD, they tell them how many of each type of units they're going to have. Some of them will apply for what they call project-based Section 8. So you'll have like a combination of 60 low-income housing tax credit units. You'll have maybe 5 project-based Section 8. You could have something called the 811 program, which is for the disabled. So it's going to be a conglomeration. The people that are getting their Section 8 will only pay 30%, and there'll be a subsidy. The people that are tax credit people will pay the rent that's prescribed by the program.
Is the
problem where it comes in with this whole financing thing is the rents are low. Okay, so the developer's got a problem because he's not getting market rate rents for those units. And Nancy, would you like to add?
I can't remember the exact formula, but there's a formula for how the rents are established for tax credit projects. They're not like the fair market rent that you've heard of for the Section 8 program. They're based on something entirely different, and I can't remember it, so I'll have to look it up and let you know. But they're established rents based on a formula that's written into the tax credit program. And as Teresa said, the rents are the rents. If you want to serve lower income people, then you have to have project-based Section 8 available, or tenants themselves can get tenant-based Section 8 from the Housing Authority.
I would like to keep that at the front of our minds, whatever we can do within the legislation to almost make that even a requirement, I feel would be helpful. In particular, if there is a development that maybe not want to include the project-based Section 8 vouchers, to me, it appears very helpful, and particularly as it relates to rent amounts, which if we are trying to just bridge again the $30,000 that we were missing from the median area income, obviously the project voucher would be, or Project 8 voucher, God, I can't even get the term right. The Project 8, Section 8 voucher would be preferred.
Right, because the developer's going to get more rent. He's going to get more reimbursement.
Okay.
For those.
And, okay, so
they'll.
Ms. Shanamine, did you have a question as well?
Except that it sort of defeats the purpose of the purpose of this is to provide housing for for people who are too rich, I'll put that in quotes. Too rich for, yeah. They make too much money to be served by public housing or Section 8, for the most part.
Can I just add something? Jackie said it, we have a toolbox, right? Yeah. This is one tool in that toolbox. It's for that missing middle. But Section 8 is a different tool in the toolbox. And all the other things we talked about are for lower income. So when we looked at this, we looked at the different pieces. And all this legislation is aimed at missing middle. It can't do all things for all people.
But
what makes this?
I'm sorry, but I've envisioned that you could do.
Make sure that you're on the mic. Make sure that you're on the mic.
Oops. I really like the Zoom meetings better. I'm used to those. You don't have to do that mic thing. So I envisioned that you could, within a project, have both tax credit units and other types of units. That it doesn't mean that like somebody is doing all tax credit units in a project, but they could do some workforce housing, and they could do, some non-workforce housing. I mean, that it really would, that would be possible to have, to address more than one income level. And I believe the tax credit program, we've talked about this, haven't we, Teresa, would allow you, when you apply for your tax credits, you can set up how many you want to have. This, it's like, you can pick different things as part of your project when you apply.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Make sure that Alderman Schandemeyer can get his question in, but just really quickly, what is the difference between, because to me, as we explain it right now, maybe as I was reading it, I was under the impression that it would be more affordable housing or workforce housing, whatever the term. But what would the difference be in what would be provided and eligible under if this was passed, as opposed to something like a Knotless Point? Isn't that workforce housing essentially? They're not too wealthy, but they're not too poor. So
no, they have no. There's no constraint or subsidy to what they can charge. I mean, it's a pure market rate for apartment development.
Right.
There's no.
I think to the degree that it might be affordable for people today, it's just because the owner hasn't raised the rents, and there's a risk there. I think that's the. But I want to just acknowledge. What Jackie was saying, I think is in here, that this would help those projects that are aiming at the under 60% area median income as well, though, because it's. I think we were right to pick up in the purpose clause that this should be aimed at anybody, any households under 100%.
Sure.
Because there are low-income tax credit projects that are trying to do apartment developments within our zoning and can't do it today. And it's the zoning that is preventing them from happening. So this is a workaround that.
Right. So
Thanks, folks. So I want to talk about one of the parts on page 3. The bulk regulation shall be applicable, specifically page 3, line 103 and 104, where the density, setbacks, and height requirements shall be governed by the bulk regulations of the R4 zoning district. Something that I like about this is it does allow R4 bulk regulations in any current zoning district in the city, which I see as a dramatic improvement. A worry I have about this is R4 is only 9 units per acre. It is not, I am mistaken on that?
Yeah.
What is the units per acre of the
25,
R4?
For multifamily, it depends. I can look it up really quick, but it's in the 20s.
Oh, it's in the 20.
I think R4 is our least restrictive zoning in terms of density. It's where you can get the maximum number of units per acre under R4.
I have the code up.
You have the bulk regulations up? Let me put-
R4 General Residence District. R4 Residence District provides for single-family detached units up to 9 dwelling units per acre and other uses compatible. So.
You have to go to the bulk table.
Bulk table.
Let me pull the bulk table up, okay?
Okay.
Keep in mind, we have to be on the mics because the general public can't hear us at all.
So in that case, I misunderstood that portion of the code. Should have been on the bulk table. Could you look up what the R4?
I'm pulling up the code right now.
Thank you.
And that was the reason that we chose R4 was because it gave us a big bonus with density. So going to chapter 2150, section 2150-100 for multifamily dwellings. For a multifamily dwelling, the density is based on 1,700 square feet per dwelling unit. But if you do structured parking there, which is in the footnote, you only need 1,000 square feet per dwelling unit. So for example, a project that has really high density that's loosely based on the R4 formulas would be 1900, is it 1900 or 1901 West Street, which is a mixed-use project with high density.
So really quickly before we move along, because you just mentioned two things, and one thing that would be helpful, I believe, too. Would it be possible if we could have the charts that they prepare in MIT for GIS of the zoning districts that would allow for
Oh, you mean a map with? Okay, sure.
So helpful. And two, I think what would also be included, or I would like to include in this, and if you would sponsor it, I will co-sponsor it because I know it's more important to you than me. But to remove parking requirements for the affordable housing or workforce housing projects. If we're talking about affordability, and obviously we've messaged back and forth as it relates to fees for water and sewage. If we want to cut back on the cost of the developer, I'd be willing more to go there as opposed to water and sewage. Not to say that I'm completely against the water and sewage proposal, but I'd be very interested in adding an amendment here that would reduce the parking requirements for workforce housing in particular. When we look at some of these lot sizes, the Willows, etc., it would just be burdensome to the developer.
I fully agree, and I'm actually going to go a little further and say eliminate rather than reduce and let the developer figure it out on their end, because parking requirements can add 5 to 15% of a cost for non-structured parking. Structured parking, that cost goes up even higher.
Can I just ask a clarification? You're just allowing the developer not to provide it, but that doesn't mean he can't provide it.
That is correct.
Okay.
It is up to the builder.
Okay.
Free market.
We'd like him to provide a bus shelter or.
Yeah, I mean, so like the other issue is that the parking requirements, and you'll hear me talk about this over the next 3.5 years, hurt the ability to even provide any kind of adequate transit service due to the forcing of more sprawl. So I would like to see that happen for all residential units. I'm going to be working on that separately, but I think that needs to be definitely put in a bill that we're implementing to try and ensure that we can have actual below market rate units in our city that have the ability to pencil out for a developer.
So I will include that as amendment number 2, which will be sponsored by Alderman Schandelmeyer.
The Brooks Amendment, eliminate them.
Remove. Well, I didn't put eliminate. I put removal. I'll leave the verbiage up to you. I'll leave the verbiage up to you.
Where is that parking requirement dictated? Is that in another? Line 112. Oh, it's in. Oh, yeah. No, then we could. That's.
Line
Okay.
112.
I'm looking in the code. Okay.
Page 3, line 112 is where the parking is talked about? I don't
The
know what-
initial allowable maximum rental rates for rental units shall be established by the developer and approved by the city of Annapolis.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if you wanted to eliminate
Oh,
parking
the area
requirements, you have to amend a different chapter of the code where the parking requirements are. I think that's.
So,
All the parking.
The mic,
All the parking requirements of the code are in chapter, it's very similar to the way you did your other amendments. They're all in Division 5, Regulations of General Applicability, Chapter 2166, Parking and Loading Regulations, and you will see in the 2166-030, number of required parking spaces, that's where the amendment would go.
But instead of, okay, yeah, I'm right with you on that, yeah, because instead of amending the actual code, I would be much more in favor of including the verbiage in our amendment of this ordinance that would eliminate or supersede the existing code so that we don't have to go back and mess with the,
Well, the code really has.
for MPDU requirements, just say that they'll be exempt from the parking
Right.
requirements as defined by section.
Yeah, we do need to cross-reference. I mean, the code has when we screw around too much with like avoiding the way the code is structured, amendment, stuff gets lost, and then it's really hard. It just needs to be cross-referenced.
But it's not a crazy thing. I mean, what Jackie's saying in terms of making the change in the parking
Right.
requirement, it's because we're establishing a new use that we're calling workforce
Housing,
housing.
right,
Every use has parking requirements. We would just be saying there's no parking requirement for this
Can I make a
use.
suggestion that's really easy?
Go ahead.
Like, if, I would suggest just adding item number 7 on page 3. Just adding an item 7 and use the same language as above. A property that meets the requirements for workforce housing set by these standards shall be exempt from the parking requirements as defined by section
Right.
blank, blank, blank of the City of Annapolis Code of Ordinances.
and the MPDU requirement, yes, you could add it there. That's a better way to do it. And it would be the parking requirements of 2166-130.
perfect. So that'll be included. Brooks, will you follow up on that?
yeah,
Okay.
and just for people's reference point, again, correct me if I am misunderstanding the bulk requirements or the parking table requirements. For multifamily dwelling units, it's currently requiring 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. So our 4 regulations would be multifamily, correct?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So
Good catch.
by
that would be-
eliminating that for our goal of below market rate housing, we can save a builder 5 to 15% per unit if they're not having to add that very arbitrary 1.5. And, you know, I'll come back for market rate housing as well, but
Is that done?
And what we did with what's the one on Francis Knoll? Gosh, they just opened up right across from Monarch Academy.
Oh,
I forget the name of it.
Town court.
Town Courts. Yeah, they don't have parking really, because we toured that facility, and I mean it's jam packed, and so the need, and as the alderman always says, and when we were in New Orleans, this was mentioned as well. If I'm in an area creating affordable or workforce housing for families or residents that already rely solely or primarily on public transportation, it's almost pointless to include the excess.
forcing the requirement of parking would be requiring people who do not have a car due to lack of income or choice to be subsidizing through their more expensive rent other people's car use.
So while I may respectfully agree with the sentiments, I would just offer that part of the challenge that we're trying to navigate here is blending income streams in order to make these units affordable. So we need to be also providing an incentive to the developers to come in and allowing them, and I understand your point that the way that you're trying to structure this is it still allows them to do that. It just doesn't require them to do that. And I fully appreciate that. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, but I just would try to broaden out our view on this, that we need to be trying to get developers to develop units that can have folks of varying income levels that are attracted to wanting to call that place a home so that it can become financially feasible. And if we create this in a way that disincentivizes building units that do have some parking with them, then we're not going to be able to hopefully achieve that. So I just would offer caution because there is the potential for unintended consequences.
Making it exempt, make it.
Making it exempt would be different than a parking maximum program or a parking ban.
Yeah, a mandate of some sort.
Correct. So by just going exempt from the requirement, a builder would have the ability to go 1.5 parking spaces per unit. Seems like a lot. I don't have to build that for this below market rate unit. I'm going to instead just do 1 space per unit as part of my choice, or 0.5 spaces per unit as part of my choice. They still need to fill those units, and if they believe that that will be easier if they choose to provide a certain amount of spaces, that's fine with me. I just strongly believe that if we have this requirement, it will make these units harder to build in a way that a developer can actually have the project pencil out.
The thing that's concerning is that we can't use this to replace Harbor House.
So I think I understand your strong feelings about parking. I'm not sure that developers are, I think that we have to have some other incentives for developers built into this legislation that make them it's worthwhile for them to want to build workforce housing. And I think we need to talk some more about the capital facility charge issue. So one of the things that we recently discovered with regard to ADU units, that if you build an ADU unit on your property and you have to pay capital facility charges for that, it comes close to $25,000 for that unit to do the water connections, the sewer connections, and the capital facility charge itself. That's a huge amount of money that you would add to the cost of every single dwelling unit in a multifamily project. And and we meant to include this in the legislation. The county has in their legislation a 50% reduction in those charges. That's a real cost savings that a developer can look at, and because that money all gets passed right on down the road. That's upfront cost. And as I understand it, in terms of building affordable housing, so just as an aside, my nephew Alex actually works for a company that does workforce housing and affordable housing, and tried to do work projects here in the city a few years ago, and was unable to do that here because of the cost of land. And we talked about this today, and what you need to offer to that type of developer in order to make them it feasible for them to fulfill their mission of being a supplier of workforce housing. And there are actually companies that's their mission. And you have to, so in terms of like the unit costs themselves, there's very little cost savings that you can make when you're building this unit for workforce housing and that same unit for more expensive housing. The cost of building the actual unit itself, I mean, you can change some of the finishes and yada yada, but it's really pretty much roughly the same. So there has to be things that where they can really save money, or they can build more units. So we've already built into this the big density increase, and I think there's nothing we're going to do about land costs. There's hardly any land in the city that is going to be attractive for somebody to do workforce housing on. It's all too expensive. Spa Road actually is, where we could do a public-private partnership, and we've talked with the committee about this, is probably one of the best options the city will have for having any type of mixed-use project that includes workforce housing as well as other income levels of housing. So,
I have a question on that. Have we, I don't bring this up, but have we excluded the option of any commercial use in any of these projects?
no, you could still do some commercial, you could still do some mixed use within this concept. I mean, you can do some workforce and some,
Well, that's,
yes.
yeah, so they, at the first floor level or some, yeah, okay,
Definitely.
Dude, that's the, that's hopefully, and it says here,
does it say that?
214803 Table of Use, Office of Mixed Use Zoning Districts. Is that
Right.
the appropriate one? It also says the property, just to kind of get us back on track here, on page 255, the property shall consist of any mix or type of dwelling units. The property shall be encumbered by a reordered deed, restrictions that state the following. The units be restricted to occupancy by eligible households under this section for at least 30 years for homeownership units and at least 40 years for rental units, except that the deed restrictions may be 15 years for lease to purchase units. So clarity, and as I'm reading it, I'm understanding that the developer would be burdened to the requirements set in the legislation if they build workforce housing for rental purposes for 40 years and housing for home ownership for 30 years? But where does the except that deed restrictions may be 15 years for lease to purchase units? Is home ownership units and lease to purchase different?
So an example of a lease to purchase project is Homes at the Glen. That was developed as a tax credit project. The tax credit program allows for what they call lease to purchase, so the people live in the rent for 15 years, and at the end of the 15 years, they are then allowed to purchase the property, and we have that project going on right now, and that's part of low-income housing tax credit program.
What is the difference though between, because this is 30 years for home ownership, so would that be almost the same thing, or?
Well, wouldn't lease to purchase, I think lease to purchase would mean that you could have, there's a type of agreement you could have where you're leasing it, but that you have the right to purchase it within a certain period of time, whereas the home ownership is? When you own it from the beginning.
That's
Okay.
right.
Okay, I just
The
want to
money
make.
that you pay each month if you elect to then purchase it, then the sum of the money that you have been paying in rent converts into equity and increases your equity stake as a homeowner when you elect to purchase it.
So if I was in.
So it's a hybrid model between exclusively renting and exclusively owning
the home.
as a way to try and incentivize someone and provide them with an opportunity to build equity in their home.
If I do the lease to purchase though, and I get to the end of my 15 years, would I still be protected for an additional 15 years under the home ownership units requirement, or once
You
I get
wouldn't
to my
own it.
15 years, I own it and I'm no longer tied to any
So is the way
I'm
that
just making sure that it's
I
not
think I
redundant.
understand kind of your confusion on
Yeah.
it, and perhaps there is thus reason to offer clarifying language. By the way I'm reading this, though, there are 3 time durations that are tied to the type of housing that's offered. If it's home ownership, it's one period of affordability restriction on there. If it's a lease to ownership, and then if it's a rental, and it's all built out to try and preserve affordability for those maxed out. So that's why we have it for a longer period of time for people who are renting, because we really want to maintain that rental stock for as long as possible. And it's kind of being titrated down slightly as we get down into home ownership.
So the
makes-
other thing that I think you have to take note of,
Yeah.
so at the very beginning of that section on line 61, on page 2, the property shall be encumbered by recorded deed restrictions that, And these numbers, 1, 2, whatever, all those 1 through 6, those are all like the policies, but the deed restrictions would be something that the city would have to approve, and they could be more detailed in terms of how the deed restrictions were written.
Do we,
No, you're fine.
do we define lease to purchase units in the code else? Do we define lease to
No.
purchase units in the code?
But if we can come up with some kind of definition of that.
And I think also that it would be a part of the regulations here that would define lease to purchase, would define requirements under the lease to purchase program.
Yeah.
So that you know when the city has some right to limit what happens, as opposed to, they'll probably from the very beginning, you'll want to have something that restricts the price of the home if it's sold. My own bias is that there probably aren't going to be that many leased purchase projects. There are very few already.
Was that the Homes for America model?
That is the Homes for America model at the Homes at the Glen. I don't know if there's any other one in the city, right? And it is a feature, I think, of the tax credit program, but there aren't very many of them. It's not an easy thing to do.
And how do you even, and again, that's where I get sometimes upset, because I feel that there almost is no way to make, I'm trying to let the fire truck go by, I'm sorry. I feel that there almost is no way to really make sure that the options are, very, very affordable. Like that you don't have to break your back to, pay your 60% or whatever towards income. For example, and I use the MPDUs as examples because it's something that we already have is up. The MPDUs program at a glance, like the legislation is very smart. Developer builds X amount of homes, X should be used for affordable housing, and you get an incentive. But the problem is when you look at it, like for example, I think Parkside Preserve at Quiet Waters is the MPDU. It's $350,000 is the MPDU price. The regular price is $569,000. Is that really affordable? Yes, but who's going to be eligible? And I think that's kind of what we've skipped over in the beginning, is that I don't think that our most vulnerable citizens will benefit very much from this. Can't be.
Well, the MPDU program basically was developed for those people in between 80 and 100%.
And would that be the same group that we're targeting here?
Yeah, because those units are 4-bedroom units with 2.5 bathrooms.
Oh, wow. That's a good deal.
Yeah, that's the.
Okay, so that's why they're priced at that level.
That's all relative to a person's income who has, 3 kids and is trying to.
But that's not what the MPDU program was meant for. The public housing is meant for people at, around 30% to 80%. Section 8's, up to 80%. MPDU is to get those people that, again, they're too wealthy to participate in the other subsidized, but they still can't afford the stuff at the high end. So this is for those middle people. In our programs, we try to reach all incomes up
All right,
and try to fill a gap, and there's a huge gap in that group of people.
I'm sorry, Eric.
Can I just say that the creation of this workforce housing use and bumping the zoning up to R4 is really key in mentioning the Parkside Preserve, where I don't know the exact layout of the development, but it's primarily single-family detached houses. There may be some townhouses, but the density there is nowhere near what an R4 district. If it was R4, they would be able to offer more affordable units there, but they're choosing to do a housing type that is inherently not going to be affordable, and that's the.
For everyone's information, the Parkside Preserve project is zoned R1B. About half of the units are going to be townhomes, and the other half are going to be McMansions.
Right, so it's one of our lowest density zones.
And if this legislation was to pass, R1B is the third permitted use, subject to standards. So technically, they would be eligible for workforce, quote unquote, workforce housing. And I think, and I'll move on because I don't want to hold us all up on the affordability piece of it, but.
That's in the category of it's better than nothing.
Yeah. I think so that we can move on to number 2, but the affordability piece for me is, I still don't know how people will be able to afford it, but I'm trusting that the staff's guidance will lead us into a place where developers feel comfortable lowering prices, et cetera. I mean, even in the county where they have the workforce housing stuff, you're still talking about 17 and some change for, 1 bedrooms, et cetera. That's not really affordable or workforce housing, I mean, so how do we...
Just to build on, to your point though, and to build off of what Teresa and Eric have already said, I think it is a reason for us to strongly consider that 50% reduction in the capital connection fee that has previously been talked about. These are all mechanisms and levers that we want to have available to us to offer as incentives to developers to give them the flexibility that they need in order to come and make these not, as Alderman Schandelmeyer has said, penciled out, right? We need to give them as much flexibility, and that flexibility is the incentive that gets them in to spend the time that they need to dedicate in order to find the capital stack in order to make all of this happen.
Can we get, it would be helpful if we could get maybe an example of an existing development that is through a model similar to the workforce housing that is, so that we can maybe even just talk to the developers to see, because my fear is that, yes, they'll get these, in particular the 50% sewage and water fee reduction, et cetera, and the developers will be reaping from the gains of reduction in fees, et cetera, and we'll still have the same communities that we have. That's my fear, but that's just me personally. So let's move on to number 2, because I don't want to hold this up.
There is one project, as I understand it, in the county that has recently been approved for workforce housing, and we might be able to arrange to get it.
In Odenton?
Yep.
Yeah, it'd be worth probably seeing that. I mean, I think it's important to acknowledge that if they are not under any constraint, if they're not bound by any of these covenants, the market rate that they would be aiming for would be a lot. It would be affordable to somebody making over 140% of the area median income, perhaps. So that's what they would be going for. They have no incentive to design for any other demographic.
Other than money, what is the best? What right off the bat, what is the incentive that a developer would look for in this model from your research?
Density flexibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah, it's trying to figure out how many units they can get, and I think all of these things that we're talking about are things that we want developers to recognize is available to a possible lot here in the city. As has been said, we've got very limited space. We want to really incentivize mission-minded developers coming in, recognizing the need that's in the community, and recognizing that they have a council, they've got a community, they've got city staff who are all wanting the same thing, and engaging in a conversation about how best to meet all of these challenges. The process of building affordable housing is extremely time intensive. It requires a high degree of specialized knowledge. It requires a variety of capital sources that all have to be figured out before we can even go in and break ground. And so the more that we can show that these mission-minded developers will be rewarded at the end of the day if they make that time commitment, the more likely we will be to achieve the goal that we all, I think, are wanting.
Have you ever seen Hamilton? I'm sure he has this room where it happens. He says, they'll have the banks, we'll have the spot, we got more than we gave and we wanted what we got. It's a little, you got to do a little, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine for affordable housing is what I'm understanding. And it sucks because all housing should be affordable. Housing is a human right, but this is the reality of it. But I'm glad we're having the discussion because it's helping us come up with other solutions.
We're gonna
Really
be the
quickly
room
before,
where it happens.
before we move on, Alderman Schandelmeyer, and then we'll jump back to what will be our amendment number 3, the water/sewage thing.
So to address the overall affordability, while for a bill specifically designed to bring about below market units, trying to focus on the completed cost of new construction there is something that we should be focusing on. We also need to keep in mind that this will be adding to the overall stock of units in our city. And so there are a couple more market rate developments, such as Nautilus Point, such as the Admiral Farragut Apartments in Eagle Rock. These are market rate houses that are cheaper than newer apartment complexes. Adding in these units takes off some pressure of applicants to those private complexes, and that prevents them from raising their rents as much if they can go into a new unit. We meet the income requirements for it. That's actually a below market rate. So not only do we need to be looking at what this can do for the finished unit of a specific project, by adding overall units, we can lower the overall market rate of other stuff in the city itself.
Wow.
It's a big reason why.
Hopefully, yes.
And the
You're
big
right.
things when it comes to any kind of adequate housing policy for a jurisdiction is the 3 S's. You have supply of units, you have subsidy for units, which we are primarily trying to tackle through this, but we can't discount that supply. And then you have the stability of units, or what it takes for renters and homeowners to be able to actually stay in those units themselves. So this legislation, if we give these incentives like density increases, parking requirement exemptions, 50% discounts on water sewer hookups, we can add both to the supply and to the subsidy of things, and not just provide an affordable place to live for these specific projects, but also potentially a more affordable place to live for other people occupying market rate housing that is a little on the lower end of the financial, a little bit of the lower end of the cost spectrum.
Reality, devil's advocate, Spa Road site, you're inevitably, you're gonna get the neighbors, Murray Hill back there saying, by doing that, you are devaluing my property, right? Or do you get that? Right?
There is no demonstrable evidence for that fact. There
love
have
that
been
answer.
numerous studies done.
I love that
There have been
answer, yes.
numerous studies done
Remember that
that provide no qualitative nor quantitative evidence of that fact.
And I'm a,
But you know what I'm saying, you're gonna get that.
and I'm,
Yeah, but you will, yes, you
I
will
would-
get that. I mean, and you have to be prepared to fight, to push back against that.
I would 100% agree that you need to be prepared in order to be pushed back against that. And I would also offer that you need to be armed with quantitative, not qualitative arguments. And the quantitative evidence is the fact that property tax values have not declined where there is more affordable housing. It's a myth. It is a closed area of research that has been no longer studied for the past 15 years because it is such a closed argument.
All right, we got to move to Amendment 3. I'm sorry, because it's 7:42, and I want to be staff. We got staff here. I don't want to have everybody here too late.
Okay.
Sewage and water.
Yeah, I sent you all a draft I did this afternoon.
So we'll have to have the language from that removed because now that it's actually in law, we got to submit all of our amendments to law. So if you could take the, do you want to use the verbiage that Kathy sent or the verbiage that you had sent?
I actually was probably drafting hers at mine at the same time she was drafting hers.
Okay, perfect.
So I didn't look at hers, but what I'm going to say about the amendments is that we still have not sat down with law to go over their issues with the original legislation. And I think we have to have that meeting and find out if they have other things that they think that we need to fix. And also, a part of that, we can put together a package of amendments for you to review.
Absolutely. And because that was a promise I had made to law, is that if we had introduced this on first reader, we would give the
Right.
courtesy for them to.
Yeah.
And for the most part, it was all, and I had met with them last week. It was
Right.
all, there were a couple grammatical errors, and then there was a thought of some redundancy, but I will allow the staff to have that discussion, to figure that out.
And you met with Ashley, correct?
I did.
So we hadn't set up a meeting yet with her. We were going to waiting for after tonight to do that, so we can say, and this is what you all agreed to, and then we can put something together that would, and we would actually, then you could introduce those amendments, or that we can also forward those to the planning commission.
Well, yeah, and for scheduling purposes here, we will be on recess in August. We want to have the amendments prepared before then because of the planning
Right.
commission. Yeah, okay.
I was thinking the amendments would get prepared so that we would be able to have them to take to planning commission for the July 21st meeting and have them endorse the amendments.
Okay.
So you have all weekend to work on those.
2 weekends, because this is a 4-day,
Yeah, but you need to get them done this weekend because it's a holiday weekend. Right. And you're working
we do have the extra
24/7. That's, you signed up to work 24/7.
Well, I used to joke with a former employee here. I would call it, and it would be a holiday, and I'd be like, no vacation for seniors management.
Oh, really?
You got to be available at all times. So are we sticking with the language that would include a 50% reduction of water/sewer fees for properties developed under this legislation?
Is that what Kathy had? Yes. That's what, and that's what's in the count. That's what the county's doing. So that would take, I will get firmer numbers on what the charges are, but I've been told they're around 25 based on our ADU discussion. So that would take them down to 12.5. I mean, that's all one-time cost. So it's not like it's like every year they get that. I mean,
One-time cost, but a significant cost. My only worry was obviously the alderman from Ward 7, who I give the courtesy for projects related to environment and et cetera. And he has used some of those funds to spearhead salaries for new employees that they're bringing on, et cetera. Do you anticipate the cost? And of course, we don't know because we don't know what any of these projects will be. But would it be so grand of a fee waiver that it would, or a fee reduction that it would impact any projects that he would have going on? Do you think?
Okay, so I don't see how he's tying one-time cost to annual salary costs. You get a one-time shot on that money.
In
It's
this
not.
past budget, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't we use the fees accrued from water/sewage to?
Oh, you're thinking of the stormwater enterprise fund.
Okay,
where
I'm
we
sorry,
used it
wrong fund,
to-
wrong
yeah,
fund. My
yeah.
apologies.
Right, you can't tie salaries to a one-time cost. I mean, it wouldn't make any
No.
budgetary sense.
Right.
Right, Ellie?
Right. You can't do that. Not recurring, you can't include recurring costs in one-time expense.
Okay.
I
Brooks,
think,
did you have a question?
I think our alderman of Ward 7 would be more concerned about environmental
I think it's, we're,
things. Gotta get those trees, gotta recover. Is that?
I just wanted to make sure,
That's a question.
I just want to say, I mean,
That stormwater.
everything in
is
here
expensive.
is really just about incentivizing more affordable housing. I mean, if we don't offer these incentives in a city of like Annapolis where the land costs are as high, we keep saying the same thing, I guess, but it's, there's too much at stake. I mean, the typical developer is going to be paying a lot of money for the land, and the costs of doing anything in this town are high, and there's just no incentive for them to do anything close to affordable housing. So
Well, I
I think
mean,
this is a big, it's
we
not,
could, I mean, the one thing that we could do that we have not discussed is rent caps, which obviously is a dangerous idea when you're talking of potential for future development. But that's something that we have not really dove into. We discussed it a little bit previously, but
Yes, we did, and I would just offer there is precedent. The entire state of Oregon has done that and capped it not only at the rate of inflation plus 7%. So that is a healthy return on investment for anybody that is investing in housing supply, and there is no shortage of examples in other jurisdictions that have implemented rent control, rent caps, depending on how you want to talk about it. And again, index it to the cost of inflation, add 7%, that's adding a healthy return.
Brooks?
One of the cautions, though, for rent caps themselves and rent control is that I believe Minneapolis was the shining example of doing this incorrectly, where before they ended single-family zoning in the city, they tried to implement a rent cap program while still maintaining a robust opposition to building new units. I'll phrase it. And that ended up exacerbating that supply shortage and wasn't able to address overall costs as significantly as when other jurisdictions implemented a program of rent control along with an increase in supply.
I'd agree with that assessment, and I would offer that that is why in the state of Oregon's legislation, they added the indexing to inflation to account for that, and to also then allow for a cap at 7% plus the cost of inflation, because it was the inflationary pressures on the overall market that ate into those rent increases that were capped, and that disincentive is what exacerbated the overall crisis.
Oregon does some cool stuff.
Let's do this because we're coming up on 8 o'clock. Obviously, we can have part 2 of this discussion, but I want to be courteous of the staff. I know y'all been here since 8 o'clock, so we still haven't got to 3, 4, 5, or 6. As Eric mentioned, though, all of these are essentially projects that will or ideas that will be necessary to help with the affordable housing ideas that we have. Any questions from my colleagues on these while we run through them really quick?
No, sir.
No. We talked a little bit about it in the model, the home on the Glen model.
Any outstanding questions from the staff or committee members?
Actually, maybe not related to this, but maybe not related to the amendments, but a quick question on some other ways along with like the water, sewer, and parking requirement reform to incentivize developer profit and maybe try to increase the density just a little bit more. Would playing with any kind of like setback requirements or lot size requirements potentially let those developers get like just a few extra units in there, and that can actually make a difference for penciling out a project?
We have that. Where we say it's density setbacks and height requirements governed by the bulkware regulations in the R4, we're upping the lot, we're lowering the lot size per
Mike.
unit,
Mike,
increasing the density. And we've lowered the amount of common open space that's normally required with a multifamily project. That's in number 2 on page 3.
I mean, if we maybe upped it above what we currently allow in R4 for genuine below market units.
I think we got the density we're proposing is really pretty high. I mean, I think there's a maximum number of units you can build on a lot too without them. We're already at 7. We can look at that, but I think that what we have is reasonable. What were you thinking?
Sometimes we want to push from reasonable to radical.
So I'm just going to do a voice of reason here. We already talked about Murray Hill and some of the feelings. So we're really pushing the envelope on this one. We're
Yeah.
allowing density in areas that aren't used to it. And so I guess how radical you want to go we need to be reasonable, I think, to be able to get this passed.
Because it's not just getting the legislation passed. It's also getting the projects approved through a process, that at some point will require some public input. You want to get to a point where the project will get built. And we've already seen what can happen when we try and push too hard on a community. I mean, look what has happened with the lofts at Eastport.
Yeah. Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, 2 questions. The environmental, seriously on the environmental, and forgive me, Alderman Savage, really, please. Really, I'm just asking, economics only. We do have very stringent environmental stormwater requirements. Is there are those a deal breaker in this situation? I mean, should we waive any of those? We have to ask those tough questions. Okay. I've heard. I'm just being a realist. I've heard that they are the stormwater replacement criteria.
Our stormwater requirements in the city are very strict.
Yes.
And I think and as are our forest conservation requirements, I think those are deal breakers to try and fool with that stuff. That's my personal opinion, based on what we see with other projects.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They apply unless noted otherwise, right?
Yes, they will apply, yes.
Yeah.
So you're agreeing that?
I don't think we should, I don't see it as being a viable path to try and lower them.
She's saying, I think it's a deal breaker for passing the legislation. but
Right.
It could be a deal breaker for some developers that want to work here.
That's what I'm
but
saying. Is it a deal
yeah.
breaker for the developers, Jackie?
But
and how can we soften that? Okay, assume it's a given. Let's assume that's a given. Okay, Rob. We'll assume that's a given, but that we have to understand that in their finance model, that's a big.
One thing,
And maybe they'll get some environmental credits. Help me, Brooks.
I actually am going to go ahead and say how we view and how a lot of us view environmentalism and housing is short-sighted, and not to have a terrible pun, we often lose the forest through the trees. I think the biggest environmental concern that we need to be worried about these days is stopping climate change. And it has been shown time and time again that denser, smaller units, which this legislation would allow, produce significantly less carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas producing items than single-family sprawl, which is why, as I love pointing out, Baltimore has a lower carbon footprint per household than environmentally loving Annapolis.
It's one of those where we can cross that bridge when we come to it, maybe, for each specific project, and see if it's something that is.
Those would be
I mean, I've heard that from developers on
other projects.
And I mean, all developers, I understand, I get it, I'm not naive, but it's just something to consider or not, or address somehow. If it is a deal breaker, we need to be able to address it somehow. That's all. I don't want a developer to walk because of our environmental controls without further discussion. But it brings me to my second question, which I got from a text people are watching. What can we do as far as our part in the review of these projects? Site plan review. Is there any expedition we can do there to costs is that been looked at on the permitting side? Is there any cost savings there? I'm just throwing it out there. Approval process.
This does, because it still requires site design review, so there's still.
Mike again.
Yeah, Mike.
We're going to send you home. We're going to zoom you in next time.
I'm only coming to Zoom meetings in the future. I don't know that there is anything, we're making it a permitted use subject to standards. It still will require site design approval from the planning commission.
Right.
But I think we are building the flexibility that we're building into the basic parameters is a good thing.
I got you.
And that
I mean,
is on
this is
page
an
3,
experimental
site
thing for us. It's an aspirational thing that we're doing here, that let's do this. Let's
Yeah.
make it building housing more attractive and more flexible in the city, and see if we can't get more affordable housing. There aren't any guarantees here.
Yeah.
We have had very little success in attracting any developers who feel it's financially feasible to do workforce housing in the city. So,
But that was before this bill was introduced.
And don't get me
Right.
wrong, I mean, I want these to be safe and thoroughly.
but I also think that we could have, I think on this committee, you have people who have real life experience with building affordable housing, and their input has just been tremendous, because they're looking at it from a different perspective than we do as planners.
Yeah.
So that's been really helpful. But we can, I think we'll certainly want to show this legislation to other people to see if there are other suggestions that they might have. I mean, to me, an ordinance is not a final piece. It's something that's going through a public hearing process, and that will be amended, hopefully in many positive ways and not in negative ways.
Yeah, that's the most important thing is to, and I think that's why this discussion was important. My favorite way to get stuff done is to get all the players at the table and talk through it.
Right.
Because as you've alluded to, and as everyone has alluded to, at some point, all of this will have to go before the public. We know there are certain communities that carry a certain attitude toward just new change in general. And so I think we can walk hand in hand in this. But what I would hate for is, I think if we are going to have amendments, all of our amendments and discussions with outside agencies, et cetera, should be done prior to the planning group, so that we don't have to go before planning twice. Because we just know that could be, difficult. All right, last couple of things while we're closing out. I see you, Terry, I'm sorry, Nancy.
Yeah, the two things I would say. One is that the Housing Affordability Task Force that we went on, most of us were on, did make a lot of recommendations about streamlining the whole approval process.
Okay, yeah.
So,
Yeah, that,
to the extent that you can get some of that done, that would be helpful to this. And now I've forgotten the other thing.
that comment, the text came from Katie George.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Katie.
All right.
And so
Call a friend.
Okay.
just quickly, obviously the site design is mentioned here. It says site design plan review in accordance with the requirements of chapter 2122 of the city code. So that's addressed. The initial allowable maximum rental rates for the rental unit shall be established by the developer and approved by the City of Annapolis Department of Planning and Zoning. What is that?
Yeah, well,
Or the rates, how is that determined?
should that have any guardrails, is kind of what I think we're thinking. Any guardrails there? Just rates established by the developer?
I'm sorry, D,
Looks like
page 3,
Looks like
112.
it's crying out for a not to exceed or something, but.
Well, maybe Teresa, I mean, when the rents are established for MPD, I mean, that's essentially the process that we follow for the MPDUs, right? Where they,
And we do want flexible.
Right, I mean, a lot of this ties back to who's funding it.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's all
However,
related to who's funding it,
Okay.
so.
well, and
just-
the other thing, the final thing, I did remember what I wanted to say.
Oh,
which is that once this passes, and we have quote-unquote workforce housing program, the city is going to have to write regulations that can expand upon some of the notions that you're talking about. And there, as I look back on it, there are also deed restrictions that are required, that are going to establish rents, that are going to establish sales prices, et cetera, or sales prices in transfers when they're transferred from the first purchaser. So, this is, even though you have an ordinance, you don't want the ordinance to be
Right.
so restrictive that
Right, you're exactly.
That you write everything down in the ordinance.
That's the way we're
Okay.
headed right now with our law office. Put it in the regulations and cite
Yeah.
the regulations under separate cover, but keep the code as simple as possible
We
and
do.
flexible.
We want it, yeah, and I agree with that. Keep it simple. My teacher used to say, keep it simple, stupid, kiss.
Kiss.
Common open space is good. Obviously, that is a requirement within this legislation, which I'm excited about, because we have talked about the dangers that we've been in previously for eliminating those uses. I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory as we've kind of ran over it. I'll do one more last take for questions. Anybody or concerns? Awesome. So we got 3 amendments from this. Obviously, the one we'll add below after 100% on line 22, removal of parking recommendations. Alderman Shandemeyer will handle that, which Alderwoman Tierney recommended essentially be the same thing as number 6 on page 3 that starts on line 96 through 99. And then waiver of the sewer an issue, or not waiving the fees, reducing the fees. Got to be careful with verbiage. But yeah, reducing the fees of sewer and water requirements. And so any other amendments we'll follow up on through Office of Law, and we'll have individual meetings before the 21st of July, keeping in mind that we probably won't have any more Housing and Human Welfare meetings until September. Okay, no, I'm sorry, we have one in July. So we have one more opportunity to meet on this, but that'll be after we recommend to the Planning Commission, if I'm correct, right? Okay, so at that point, we'll just be tweaking any okay, awesome.
We're going to be doing a staff report for this before the Planning Commission, and it sounds like what was mentioned, we'll attach the zoning map and the R4 guideline. I mean, there'll be a few attachments to kind of clarify the.
Absolutely, that'll be helpful. Also, density height, we talked about that, but there was no set answer, so that's important too.
We're going to include like the bulk regulations chart from R4. And one more amendment I'm going to suggest is there is that new general language that I think the Office of Law has drafted about having rules and Department of Planning and Zoning develop policies, rules, and regulations in conjunction with legislation that we could have a cross-reference. And I think they've put that recently in, like, I think it went into and I don't know where it is, I'll have to find it, but I think it's recently been put into some legislation. You know what I'm talking about?
We can have them donate to the.
Okay.
It's done all the time in federal
Right.
legislation.
Yeah.
The last item is such rules and requirements
right.
as are necessary to implement this legislation.
Right.
It's always like the last line of
Yeah,
it.
we can add a section that references that. There's some general language that's you all have had in legislation recently. I think you had it in the, not in Spa Road, but I think it went into, so that, and because there's that new part in, I think it's in chapter 2 of the code, that if a department does rules and policies and regulations to implement something, there's a whole process for that John Tower had to go through recently with the outdoor dining regulations. Do you all remember?
0621 is what she's mentioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Takia.
We can add that someplace in here too as another amendment, and we, okay?
So
Right, it is 0621.
So we'll probably end up with about 6 or 7 working amendments, which I'm fine with, because it's all critically important to public persuasion. So,
Right.
I think we're good on this. We'll meet individually. I'll obviously be in touch with the staff from the planning department. We greatly appreciate you all coming. Director LaPlace, appreciate you allowing the staff to be present. Appreciate the commission, obviously, for coming out and all the work you've done over the last 3 years. Can you believe it? We met 3 years ago for our housing task force stuff. In 2019 was the initial meeting, and then COVID happened, and then we started meeting again. And so it's been a long time coming, but I think this is a great start. And as you alluded to, there are so many other recommendations the Affordable Housing Task Force have made. And so we'll start to pump those out through law as well. But we needed to get a firm base, and this was it. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None? Meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.